Raft is a game I didn't think I'd like. It's a game in a genre that I normally don't partake in. It's a game that I purely believe would end up keeping its status as a simple indie game that has some charm to it. And yet, despite what I just said, Raft is a highly regarded indie game released on Steam in May of 2018, and has received multiple updates including a whole new UI, new creatures, new buildings and tools, and most recently, more ways to customize your own raft with a vastly improved and expanded decoration system. Raft shares the same genre as one of the most successful video games ever created, and yet it continues to live on with an extremely loving community. The title of this video is a legitimate question. I know that I love Raft. I just want to know why. I first heard about Raft through one of my favorite YouTubers, Mr. Fruit, who played the game with two of his best friends, Robbie V and Arios, three of which set out on an adventure that caused two of them to lose their minds, and one laughing amidst the chaos. The series was made all the way back in 2018, when the game was first released on Steam, getting a whole new revamp to the UI, crafting, and so much more. There were still new features and optimizations to be added, but back then, the game received loads of positivity from players, which has continued to this day. Back when I first watched this series, I lacked a proper PC to play it on, so I only had this LP and various other videos to go off of. It wasn't until I actually got my current PC in 2020 that I finally was able to give this game a proper go, along with many others that I wanted to try in the meantime. Raft isn't like any other survival game I've played, which I want to say is limited to these two. Shows how little I've spent in survival games. Raft has you starting out on a raft, and having you search and collect supplies to ensure that you survive. Collecting wood, plastic, palm leaves, barrels, and crates, the player steadily improves their chances at surviving while expanding on your mobile home. However, whereas other games in the genre can have moments of downtime, Raft rarely does, and it keeps the player engaged. You'll always need to keep food and thirst meters high, and you'll need to be aware of Bruce over here, whether or not he's biting at you or the raft you're stranded on, and you'll need to be aware of just about everything around you. Using that hook of yours, you'll be able to reel in trash throughout the ocean and put it to good use, creating structures that can aid you in cooking food, purifying the seawater, and creating ways for you to get around. Creating more foundations to expand your raft outward gives you more space to put objects on, but usually items require more than just one material. Some require 2, or 3, or 4. And these items don't come cheap, requiring you to make decisions in the early game on what to build first. It's surprisingly hard to make these decisions since each item you can craft has great value, whereas other games usually have obvious choices. Take the crop plots, for example. These things allow you to plant your own crops and harvest them to get continuous food, and eventually, grow trees to chop down for extra wood and leaves. However, even as you get into the late game, these small crop plots are still valuable, since you don't want/can't use the medium or large crop plots to plant potatoes or harvest more flowers to color your raft for aesthetic purposes. Meanwhile, and please bear with me, let's take a look at Minecraft. Some items become irrelevant very quickly, and some are objectively useless. Let's look at small, menial things first. Stairs and ladders. You don't need these, it's purely if you wish to expand your home out and make a second story for your place. But you can continue to expand it to the side and forget about verticality. In Raft, you are required to make the second story in order to create the antennas, receiver, and battery to power it, since it's kind of required to progress the story. Then there's actual useful things like tools. Once you're able to get iron relatively easily, it's pointless to make the old stone and wood versions of the tools, since they deteriorate so much more quickly, and collecting materials is even more of a common occurrence in Minecraft than it is in Raft. Raft's basic plastic hook is still useful since it's good to have in a pinch and doesn't reduce the rewards you obtain. The only downside is that you can't throw it as far, which can be worked around in some ways. Raft's enjoyment comes from purely being able to kick back and relax, not having to worry about any other huge issues that can get in the way. Whereas other games I love require extreme focus, rapid repetition in its inputs, or having to plan out every single exact moment from the point I start, I can boot up Raft on easy or normal and just chill. And what helps aid that enjoyment is the music. Plus, with everything that I just said, all of that is enjoyable, with the added benefit of co-op. I was able to convince my buddy Demonsmith to jump back into a fresh world for the purpose of collecting footage. I will admit, playing the game solo is relaxing, but it can get boring. Then again, I think that nearly everything else with friends makes the game so much better. And playing the game with this guy, it can be simultaneously fun and incredibly frustrating. And on top of all of that, Raft has an extensive story, which I cannot talk about here. Not for the sake of spoilers, but because even with my 40 hours of playtime, I haven't finished the story yet. The furthest that we got to was Balboa Island, before we both stopped playing for a long time. What I do know is that you're exploring the places that others tried to go to in the past. I love Raft, back when I first played it, and still now. It's one of the few gems in the genre that I can tolerate and go back to for a long time, and I have nothing but fond memories of it. It's a game that I honestly recommend to just about everyone, even those who aren't a fan of the genre. Raft is an expertly crafted title that is still being updated with new content and the like. Red Bee Interactive have shown that they have a great foundation for this game, and they plan to continue it into the future. But I won't deny that while I do love this game so much, it does have growing pains that need to be ironed out if at all possible, because during our most recent playthrough there were a few things that nagged out at me. For one, Bruce is pretty easy to kill once you figure out how he works. He will occasionally go after your raft and attempt to destroy your foundations, forcing you to fend him off when it happens, lest you lose a part of your mobile home. And you can use things to distract him, like shark bait, but it uses up your fish, which you can cook and eat. But when you decide to go and challenge him underwater, you'll quickly find how his attack pattern works and when to appropriately time your attacks to stop him. When he goes in for a bite, attack early, not late. It'll take a few attempts to get the timing down, but once you master it, you can solo Bruce when he's at full health, when he just respawned, and collect his head and shark meat, which eventually will become the bulk of your food supply, along with so much cooked fish. Which makes me wonder as well, what's the point of having potatoes and beets? They give nothing compared to cooked fish, and are surprisingly difficult to come by in the grand scheme of things, unless if you plant and harvest them often. But since fishing hooks are easy to make, and they can give both huge and small fish, why even bother eating cooked potatoes and beets? Second is that some of the islands are more useful than others. Demon and I both concluded late into our playthrough that the big islands are significantly less valuable than the smaller ones. While those huge islands had a lot of vegetation to cut down, as well as caverns for dirt and a lot more creatures like warthogs, they lacked arguably the most important material, mainly ores. Metal ore, copper ore, and seaweed can only be found in the edges of islands underwater, meaning you have to go underwater to find these things and collect them, unless you happen to get lucky with finding them in crates. Metal ore is arguably the most important resource in the game, since metal ingots can be made into hinges, bolts, and other things that are required for those late game creations. Copper is used to make circuit boards and batteries, which is mandatory to progress through the story. And seaweed and vine goo are a must for the more practical equipment and advanced tools that you can get. Since these huge islands are mostly occupied by creatures and trees instead, it makes them less valuable than simple islands that have a couple trees on them. Perhaps changing the economy of materials across these islands could make each one more unique. Or perhaps I got unlucky. There's a huge power creep in the game. Once you get to the late game, you'll be swimming in materials, food, and water, meaning that all those early things you had to keep track of all the time becomes a mere afterthought, as you'll have storages full of single types of materials just collecting dust. Again, perhaps I haven't gotten far enough in the game to make use of these items, but it feels like you become a hoarder by the end game thanks to a lack of a reason to use those materials. Regardless, Raft is a wonderful title that deserves a lot more attention by people. Even though it's doing extremely well on Steam, did very well in early access, and has a wonderful reception among players. Red Bee are slowly working on Chapter 3 of the storyline, people are buying it more and more, and above all else, Raft has continued to live on. And I hope it fully releases going into the future.